Welcome to the Aid Market Podcast, where foreign aid partners connect to learn about key funding trends and market insight. The podcast is co-hosted by Aid Connect Data, the pipeline and market intel software for USAID partnering, and Connected International, the leading USAID partnering support consulting firm. Now, here's your host, Mike Shanley.
Welcome, everyone, to the Aid Market Podcast. Very excited to have our friend Chuck Pope here today. For those of you who don't know Chuck, he's the founder and CEO of Pope International, an organization you can work with to partner to win U.S. government contracts. And he has 20 years of U.S. federal experience, including 15 years at USAID as a senior contracting officer, acting deputy assistant administrator, and chief of operations in the Global Health Bureau, foreign service officer, and served on the COVID and New Partnerships Initiative task forces. He also supported key initiatives like localization and private sector engagement, and before that was in Peace Corps in the Eurasia region. Chuck, very excited to have you here today. Great to have you back. We're going to get through a lot of different topics today. So thank you for taking some time to share your deep insight into what's going on in the market. And if it's all right, let's just get started with the first topic. So we have here, first one is, this is something that's come up at conferences a lot, staffing shortages, specifically focused on contracting officers. I think even going back years, that's been a consistent question when I see USAID staff, sometimes the administrator who are at a conference. Usually there's someone that gets up and asks a question on that just to keep it on top of the agenda. I know there's been some news recently on this. Can you kind of give us, for those not as familiar, keeping in mind we have a lot of new partners on following as well, what is the issue with staffing shortages? Why does it matter? And then maybe what's the recent news?
Thanks, Mike. And first of all, thanks so much for having me again. I love the partnership. I love the relationship that we have and that we get to have these conversations. As Mike mentioned, I think many of you know me, but if you don't know me, please link in with me at Charles Chuck Pope. As many of you know, I constantly post helpful things. So again, happy to continue all these relationships. I'm going to probably sound like a bit of a broken record vis-a-vis a number of the topics we're going to get to today. Where staffing is concerned, I have been saying especially since I left the agency, that the USAID is in the midst of a staffing crisis, a catastrophic staffing crisis, especially in the acquisition and assistance workforce. And so almost any issue that can be raised with the agency, and I do want to give the proviso, I love USAID. Everything I say it comes out of love for the agency. I get to say things I didn't get to say previously as a career officer, but at the root of almost any issue facing the agency right now is staffing. And some of you have heard this anecdote, but it's one of my famous saddest anecdotes from my time at AID, and it was towards the end of my service when I was asked to serve on the COVID Task Force 2.0. And we were meeting with a political appointee who, by her own account, was very close to administrator power. And so she went on, and I finally, when I finally got to say something, I begged her and I pleaded with her to tell administrator power that AID does not have the horses in the stable to execute Administrator Power's ambitious agenda. Unfortunately, this political appointee got very huffy with me and essentially said those that don't support Administrator Power should find new jobs. And I said, that's not what I'm saying. We all support what Administrator Power is doing. We just don't have the staffing. And this was before Afghanistan, and this was before Ukraine. Okay, so fast forward to September 8th. I believe it was September 8th. A scathing letter went to Administrator Power from Senators Markey, Warren, and Sanders, essentially expressing their deep concern about USAID staffing. and if you haven't seen this, I don't know if there's a way to get it out after this, Mike. But again,
Yeah, we can put it in the show notes. We'll link it in
yeah,
there, Chuck.
yeah. So it's fascinating because you don't normally see this pointed of communication between the legislative branch and USAID. And in all fairness to administrator power, these staffing issues have been burgeoning, if you will, for decades. But it does not seem in the eyes of these very powerful senators that AID is doing too much about it. Again, I encourage you to read that. And we can talk a little bit more, Mike, if you want me to, about how this applies to the ANA staffing. But one of the things I sort of found this, I'm sort of like chuckling a little bit to myself. So the senators say, we want this, this, and this, and this. Do you need OPM's help? And let me tell you what USAID's answer to that is, heck no, we don't want OPM. They go a step further. Do you need the State Department's help to solve this? And AID never wants the State Department. So this is more than a shot over the bow. And they want these workforce reports. And so, anyways, again, it's now public record just how just how catastrophic these staffing issues are. And I don't know, Mike, if you wanted me to go into.
Could you talk? You mentioned it's unusual in your 15 years there. Is this something that happens a few times per administration, or how unusual is it? And based on that, obviously, I mentioned there's regularly a question from the audience at a conference that has a certain level of influence. This sounds like it has much higher level of influence. What are you going to look for? What potential changes would you anticipate from this?
Well, so basically what USAID has been doing is they've been robbing Peter to pay Paul. So AID is a hodgepodge. I think I once saw a report. There are 14 different hiring mechanisms at AID. And so, of course, AID is a foreign affairs agency, so it's supposed to be staffed by foreign service officers. And that's sort of one of the premises of this letter. It's increasingly not being staffed by foreign service officers, and AID is being increasingly staffed by foreign service limited positions and institutional support contractors. In fact, when I was at Global Health, and I can't remember if it's referenced in here, at one point of the 800 staff members in Global Health Bureau, 600 of them were institutional support contractors. And this is nothing against institutional support contractors. The premise of this is these people should be direct hires. And I think most institutional support contractors would say, yeah, I would prefer to be a civil service or a foreign service officer. So, and where this is related to the ANA workforce, some of you may or may not know that there was a gentle persons agreement last administration for Mark Walther, a senior executive service official, to become the head of the Office of Acquisition Assistance, which had historically been a senior foreign service position. So out of respect to the agency and out of respect to this individual, I do know who has been tagged to be the new head of OAA. And that is coming through the SES ranks again. So that promise that the agency made to the union and to whoever else has been broken. And that's nothing to take. This does not meant to take anything away from that person who's been earmarked, who I think will be wonderful. But again, it's another indication of the foreign service in a foreign affairs agency not having leadership roles. Over.
And how does this then affect the partners on the outside? We're talking internally. Is it delayed awards? Does this delay procurements coming out? Are there less RFPs and RFAs? There's more use. What can partners expect as a result of this?
Yeah. So here I am, the broken record. This is the staffing. Any of these things that we've been talking about, delayed awards, stuff not appearing on the business forecast, not being able to meet with COs, these are but symptoms of the greater disease of a catastrophic staffing issue. A couple of weeks ago, I talked to DevX in a very similar format of this, and I said, please be kind to your CEOs. Please, they have horrible lives these days. I mean, it was tough being a CEO when I was there. I can't imagine, because I have constant conversations with CEOs and AOs. It's just, if you're not getting debriefings, I mean, across the board, because, Mike, you and I do this all day long. We partner with people to get awards and manage their awards. Everything's delayed. And one of the things that's funny is I made a conscious decision at this point to not have as my business model winning personally USAID contracts and grants. Because you know what? Had I had that as my model, I'd be out of business right now, because stuff is just not moving. And it's because of the staffing, quite frankly.
And last question at this point, is there anything the partners can do to facilitate or make the CEO's life better? Certain requests not to send, or certain ways to word requests? Or is it just do your homework, put in strong proposals, have properly written approvals with good justifications? Any advice on what they can do to be good partners to their CEOs?
Yes. So almost at least weekly, somebody tells me, because I once was the unofficial king of infographics at USAID. And one of my infographics was the 4Ps. And I'll get this, people run into me, I loved your 4P infographic. So it's essentially, it's what's the problem, what's the proposed solution, what's the policy, and what's the precedent. And so I found that AID's most experienced implementing partners were interacting with me as a CEO sort of in that manner, and they didn't know it. And I just gave that as a cheat sheet to everybody else. When you come into me, tell me what the problem is. Even give me a proposed solution or solutions. What's the policy? What in your award allows what you want to do or allows me to make a decision or whatever? And then most importantly is the precedent. Especially if it's something, that's hasn't maybe, is a little bit off the beaten path. So if you sort of tee this up for your CEO, I think that they'll be most appreciative, and that sort of helps them make quick decisions. Because like I say, they have horrible workloads. Anything that you can do to help them with their workload, I think will be appreciated.
And if nothing else, just keeping that in mind during your communication with them. All right, Chuck, let's move to the next big topic, localization. So as with staffing shortages, give us a bit of an overview from your 15 years. There was USAID Forward. There's always been some focus or priority on localization. The definition of what is local continues to evolve. Could you talk us through a little bit of what you've seen when you were at the agency in terms of how the localization agenda developed, and then where we're at now, what administrator power, what they consider local, and what you think they mean and are looking for in the localization agenda?
Excellent. I think we all love localization, and I had the good fortune, unbeknownst to myself till the end of my career, I worked on the localization agenda, really throughout my career. And localization in one shape or the other has continued across administrations, and we will potentially get to the 2024 election, even if there's a Republican administration in 2025. The localization agenda will continue. So again, localization is good. The AID currently has a few different nuanced descriptions of what being local is, when it comes to getting direct funding, and all of these are available, on the locally led sites and the NPI sites. And just to kind of like save some time, I'll kind of talk about localization writ large. A few things that are concerning me is AID will have, has published, this is what it takes to be considered a local implementing partner. Big surprise, some of you have worked with USAID, the missions are not applying those criteria sometimes appropriately. I'm hearing from partners that they will qualify as a local implementing partner, and it's usually kind of a franchise or a subsidiary or whatever of an INGO, and then the mission is saying, yeah, y'all aren't really local. And so that's one of the things that disturbs me. Why go to all this trouble to spell out the criteria, and then unfortunately people are putting extra hoops. It looks like you want
to jump in there, Chuck, and I want to let you finish your thinking after that. But just one thought: a couple years ago, when I heard Administrator Power speak, she spoke more about localization. Are we talking about the legal entity that's sending the invoices to USAID, or are we talking about the perspective that's brought to it? If it's a large contractor in Washington, D.C. that wins a $50 million contract in East Africa, and they hire 100%, we'll say Ugandan staff across the country, all the invoices are coming from DC, but all the staff are in Uganda, they're Ugandan. Is that localization? What are your thoughts on localization? It seems like there's two tracks. What is your legal status? And then what is the perspective being brought to the program design and implementation?
But listen, I think we could probably have just one session on localization. So, so keep in mind, there are the twin pillars of Administrator Power's vision, which I support, by the way. I think it's a great vision. There's the 25% funding, going to local partners, meeting those criteria. And then there's the whole notion of locally led. And what I'm seeing is, like you, Mike, I work with a number of different partners. I'll basically work with anybody, who's, has a vision and all that. And so even the largest INGOs years ago, I mean, everybody's smart. Everybody could read the tea leaves. I mean, this all started under the Raj Shah administration in earnest. I think that a lot of the savvy organizations had already been moving to, to locally led type, approaches. So I don't think that that is going to be the hard part. It's the moving 25% of USAID's budget, however you cut it up, to direct awards, to local entities. And so Administrator Power herself has recently admitted that this is a moonshot. It's likely not going to happen. And then there are all kinds of, there's a discourse on how all of this is being counted. I will tell you, and I hope nobody gets angry, AID does not have the horses in the stable to move 25% of its funding to direct awards to local partners, especially in the midst of a staffing crisis, because you can't. What I found with localization approaches, it's one thing to give a local implementing partner $1 million, 500,000. Now, where I noticed the wheels started falling off the bus was 15 million, 30, and so basically AID can't absorb another extra 10,000 awards a year that are basically smaller awards, even if they're doing them fixed amount awards. So, and I said this on the DevX, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. Okay, so the short-term measure is to do more of these grant facilities where I think everybody has a role to play in localization. The larger NGOs, the larger companies, essentially having GUCs, having grants under cooperative agreements, having these grant facilities. And it's sort of the whole notion of MPI when it was laid down last administration, that the funding would be pushed down to the subs, and the funding had to be pushed down to subs, and then the prime would be sort of working on capacity with the subs, sort of like managing everything, because, and I'm getting ready to be quiet, AID does not have the capacity to build their own capacity let alone the capacity of especially first-time local recipients. And like I say, localization is its own hour-long, conversation. But that's the gist of it so far.
And I would say in the we do weekly polls too on just different topics, and what the USAID market is interested in. Localization is always at the top from every side. A couple ways to take this, and we will have some follow up. We had a recent episode with Patrick Fine, former CEO of FHI 360 and former senior MCC and USAID official. So feel free to check out that episode. We'll have some upcoming ones on localization as well. Chuck, you mentioned NPI, the new partnerships initiative. You were involved in getting that launched in the last administration. How does that fit into localization, and where do you see that's at, and where's it going?
Yeah. So NPI was the crown jewel, if you will, of the effective partnering and procurement reform. Hundreds, over 100 recommendations. And so basically NPI was operationalizing EPPR. Sorry for all these acronyms, but I think we all know them. And so as NPI has evolved, and one of the things I'd like to say, I had so much respect for Administrator Power. She gave credit to Administrator Green and his team, so I thought that was very nice. Usually initiatives like NPI don't survive new administrations, but it was a bipartisan effort at the congressional level to say, hey, NPI is good, you need to do it. So again, that's great. And so NPI currently, it changed a little bit different. It has changed a bit under kind of this new the new reality. So NPI, when it was first laid down, included APS's annual program statements. So essentially NPI right now does not, to the best of my knowledge, does not have any funding opportunities. It's more of they help operating units to essentially operationalize everything. And so again, it's promote local leadership, seek innovative approaches, lower the barriers to partnerships. And so essentially it does not seem too much that NPI is a resource for, like, one of the things they say right off the bat, you can't even send in an unsolicited application to NPI. But it's now more of a resource for missions and operating units.
Would it be accurate to describe almost as an internal consulting firm that can advise missions and DC bureaus on how they can incorporate aspects of the initiative into the work?
I think that would be absolutely accurate. And usually, Mike, you asked me, like, well, how can partners get involved? And I think that, my biggest piece of advice for partners is to be, to be conversant, be aware of AID is doing. Don't assume that your USAID counterparts know everything the agency is doing. So if somebody says to you at a reception with the ambassador, we'd like to do more with this localization stuff, but what do we do? Well, hey, NPI, have you looked at the NPI page? Because one of the things that the NPI espouses, again, is lowering the barrier to entry, which my approach, which wasn't just my approach, but it was something that NPI really took off with. NPI is the two-step process, either phased acquisition under contracting or concept note full application under assistance. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, and I said this when I was an agreement officer, USAID should almost never ask for a full application out the gate. They should always start with a concept note. Why? Not just because AID are nice people, it makes the evaluation process easier. Because, and I got a ruling on this, when you issued the call for concept notes and when you evaluated concept notes, competition was satisfied at that point. And that's very, very important, because satisfying competition through the evaluation of a concept note, 5 pages, 4 or 5 technical pages plus a notional budget, is far easier than satisfying competition on a 30 to 50 page application with all the annexes and la 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 la. So I used to say, we are doing this not just because we're nice people. This makes life easier. And oh, by the way, AID has to find ways to work smarter amidst its staffing crisis. Over.
And what we've seen in supporting clients with their USAID work and partnering, especially a lot of new partners who are looking to get subcontracts, is that there's a greater openness among the primes to talking to new partners, to finding when new partners come to them, to that the large primes knowing that new partnerships is a priority of the administration. They're looking for ways. Okay, great, you're a new partner and you have the right background and qualifications. We never see anyone really compromise on past performance, but if they're bringing that expertise from non-USAID funding sources. So on that subcontract prime partnering space, we are seeing a greater openness there. And then also we have a lot of clients also in the European Union, in the UK and Switzerland. And with them, sometimes our conversation is, wait, we're not American. We can't get money from USAID, right? Well, no, you know, there's the 935 geocode that you can for a significant amount of the procurements. And there's a lot of partners over there. So I think just having that out there just shows there is this openness, there is this interest. And we'll be in Europe next month doing a couple of events, doing some outreach there. We'll get to it too in a second, Chuck. I know you were just in Warsaw at a key Ukraine conference as well. Staying on the localization, small business initiatives. So obviously there's the OSDBU office that has been there for I don't know how long, a long time, promoting small business. And there's a conversation of how do small businesses, is there a prioritization of if you're local versus small business? You want to just talk about your take on small business and localization and the new partnerships initiative?
Definitely. I got a small slap on my hand from one of my good friends in OSDBU because during the DevEx conversation, that was all like question based. So like real time answering questions. And my OSDBU friend was like, we were disappointed you didn't talk about OSDBU. I was like, there weren't any questions. And so I think that OSDBU, and I have a lot of respect for OSDBU, they are trying to, draw the relationships between localization. Like what I like to say is none of this is mutually exclusive. Mike, you know that I refer to my clients as partners. I don't have competition because I view everybody as sort of, there's like a role to play. Is there a role for small businesses to play in localization? Absolutely. Is there an administrator policy to move 25% of the money to small businesses? Well, no, but that's because there was already there were the Small Business Administration goals, which AID got an A on writ large. But and OSDBU knows that this is a bit of a concern. So within USAID scores, it'll have like the category women-owned small business and all of that. So the goal for service disabled veteran-owned small business at USAID last year was 3%. They actually achieved 0.39% of that target. And so that's not really an A, and I don't think I want to mention the letter with a minus that I think that would actually get. And one of the things is we've had conversations with USAID is like, can you imagine a future headline? USAID gives billions to foreign organizations, but next to nothing to service disabled veterans-owned small business. So myself and some others are working with the agency to try to get those numbers up. It's just, I'm an old contracting officer. There are ways to handle this. Basically, AID needs to wholly or partially set aside more opportunities for service disabled veteran-owned small business. And so I get that USAID, technical officers don't want to bet the whole ranch, a multi-million-dollar program. Well, you can set aside a component. So anyway, so yeah, kind of like you, Mike, like I do all kinds of advocacy for people, but again, I want to help AID before they have problems. I'm not a service disabled veteran-owned small business, but again, that is a headline were it to come out that I don't even know how USAID defends against it. And I could not going to name them, but I could name a number of senators and congressmen that would be up in arms at that. I mean, when I saw that figure, I was like, I'm surprised people aren't beating on the door as what is going on. But, again, my whole approach to this, and this was my approach at USAID, and unfortunately, with a lot of USAID's initiatives, sometimes people will view it as they don't want me anymore. And that's, again, and this is kind of a conversation we can get to when we get to A&A tools. Should you use an INGO to implement every USAID project? No. Should you use a local implementing partner to implement every USAID program? No. But there's a role for all of us to play in. And again, I think one of the things that I liked that Mark Green said, attributed to him, USAID's efforts on increasing its partner base, we just want to make the tent bigger. We want, again, and everybody has a role to play. I think that's the real challenge of messaging what USAID is trying to do. Over.
And the other piece is the dollar amount since the Obama administration has continued to go up overall across multiple administrations. Obviously, the funding priorities change too. So there is a growing significant amount of funding, and we'll get to the elections and the upcoming budget conversations or current budget conversations in a bit. Chuck, this is an important one. Any other thoughts on localization or anything else you want to add on anything related to that?
Localization is here to stay. I think it all makes sense. One of the things I tell the INGOs and the firms and nobody's really losing awards. And one of the things I was going to say earlier was what you're seeing. Everybody's smart. Almost any new RFA, RFP has some sort of localization component. So my advice to some of you frustrated prospective USAID partners, these companies are going to come knocking on your door because I already know it's happening, because they have to come in with you, on these awards. And so again, everybody has a role to play. I think that we all agree that locally led programming makes sense. Gone are the days of, the Chuck Popes of the world are going to tell whoever how to run their country, whatever. No, I think we all, again, it's just the devil's in the details and just sort of getting that right. So, it happens and everything moves forward. But I always tell people, no large USAID implementing partner is going out of business as a result of localization, just because it mathematically is impossible to do what USAID says they want to do, in my opinion. Over.
Another question after I said that was the last on localization. I am seeing some of the partners proactive. So some waiting to see what's the definition that's going to come from USAID, what's the guidance, what's the strategy, and other ones reading the tea leaves, locally led, and proactively saying, we're a large prime NGO, we're a large prime contractor. Here's how we're locally led. Here's our locally led strategy. So almost getting ahead of it and saying, this is how we're incorporating locally led design into our work. Any thoughts on that? If that is effective, ways that the partners can be leading as opposed to, waiting for guidance on the locally led and localization initiatives?
Yeah. I mean, good programming solves basically everything. And so one of my, I have partners from Parkway Patriot to mom and pop NGO doing programming with orphans in Central America. They have great programming. They have a great message. They do a good job. So people are seeking them out. I think when I get retained to consult on localization, a lot of this is it's maybe nuancing some operations, maybe it's reorganizing a little bit, but at the end of the day, all of the AID is in the business of finding good partners, great partners that bring excellent programming. And so so absolutely, you should be proactive. And the best way that you can be proactive is, again, do you need to adjust your operations to comply with USAID's public criteria? But great programming solves everything. And so, be proactive.
And we'll regularly, with all the things, I will share it with clients, is focus on your past performance. What have you done? What qualifications do you bring to this? And then say, and we have an office here. Here's our registration. These are the different types of entities, we have within our organization, but really focusing on that experience. All right, great, Chuck. Let's jump to the next topic here. Ukraine and conflict zones globally. You were just in Warsaw at ISOA Summit. Could you give us a little summary of what came up there, both on Ukraine, on other conflict areas globally? Take it over.
I was just at the ISOA, which stands for the International Stability Operations Association, their Ukraine conference in Warsaw. I know that money is tight and you can't belong to every association, but ISOA is an interesting association to belong to. They are very proactive, and they seem to have high level contacts and do high level outreach, which I'll get to on one of the things they did in conjunction with this. Mike has a relationship with ISOA. I have a relationship with ISOA. In fact, ISOA is planning to stand up an aid and development committee, if you will. So anyways, you can reach out to Mike and me if you want to hear more about ISOA. But one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on ISOA, I myself am not a member, but one of my partner companies is one of the things that they were able to set up is they went into Ukraine a couple days before this conference, which had 460 participants, and they met with the highest levels of the Ukrainian government, and they also met with the embassy and AID. And I have a bit of a readout. I don't want to steal all their thunder, but one of the things that the slogan that the Ukrainian government has or had with ISOA is "Win the war and win the future," and clearly the stability community, which is many of us, whether or not we actually work to stabilize, is part of what the Ukrainians view as winning the future. So probably most interesting to the folks here. So this came from the USAID mention. This is what they anticipate, where they anticipate future programming in Ukraine. Energy is a priority sector. I think we all know that, and Tetra Tech has that major award. The advice there is to seek Tetra Tech out to potentially be a sub under what they're doing. I think they're mostly procuring generators at this point. Demining, and I could get into demining. What are they for every month of a kinetic operation that involves mines, it's a year of cleanup. How long has this war been going on? And yes, it is a war. It's not a special military operation. So demining is going to be big in the future. Agriculture, Ukraine helps to feed the world. Rail transport, I don't know how much that will affect us, but health, kind of typical AID. Democracy and governance, I think that you might have seen that Zelensky just sacked a whole bunch of government officials over concerns from his allies on what's going on with the aid. So democracy and governance is going to continue to be a focus, especially of the Zelensky administration. Internally displaced persons, there are millions of Ukrainians displaced both internally and outside of the country. So that's gonna be ongoing. And then of course conflict and stabilization. So the view of the Ukrainians is what AID does, what stability does. We're gonna win the war with Department of Defense, but Winning the Future has all of us aidniks, playing a role. I mean, there were umpteen vendors there that could help you set up an office in Poland, that could help you set up an office in Ukraine. I mean, it was an amazing conference. And again, it's all hands on deck to make sure that Ukraine prevails, wins the war and the peace. Even though I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Russia, my sympathies are with the Ukrainian. I stand with Ukraine, and it was great to see how many stood with Ukraine. I mean, we had like the Finnish ambassador, we had a Ukrainian officer. It was a great conference. So,
and I'm on the board of the Society for International Development, DC, our conference, another. In addition, I saw a great association to join if you're interested in this market. Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Ambassador Markarova, she came to speak there. She got a standing ovation before and after her talk. And one thing she mentioned, a question was, if we want to support the reconstruction, when should we go to Ukraine? And her response was, you should be there now. You should be in Kyiv now. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Eastern Ukraine. I have my Ukrainian flag just off camera, the map of Ukraine right here. So yes, staying closely following this, and we'll continue to update on this. But Chuck, one thing that comes up, despite that personal bias, is does Ukraine get too much attention? And I think it's, as you mentioned, it's so important. It's not just Ukraine. This is defending democracy for the West. Where do you see it fitting into Afghanistan, the coups in Africa, other conflict zones globally?
Yeah, Ukraine does not get too much attention. And I think the ripple effects. I think most pundits will point to the Arab Spring being caused by the price of bread. So and because Ukraine, provides so much food to Africa, and the rest of the world. And again, I don't want to make this a Russia bashing like session, so I'm going to focus on Putin. Putin knows what he's doing. Now, of course, he miscalculated. He thought the Ukrainians were going to roll over, but Putin cannot prevail in Ukraine. On every level. And one of the things that was really cool was being in Poland. I hadn't been to Poland in 20 years, and I was just so happy and proud, proud, if you will, of the Poles. Like, Warsaw is this beautiful, vibrant city, had been flattened by the Nazis, flattened by the Soviets. By statistically, Poland, if they don't already have it, is going to have Europe's largest army. They know what happens if Ukraine falls. And so, again, Ukraine is extremely important, because if Ukraine falls, that emboldens some of the other bad actors. And, again, should we be careful stewards of what's being spent there? Absolutely. And there are steps being taken, to handle that. I get tired of the it's a corrupt country. I mean, I love the United States. There's a level of corruption in the United States. I think the question is the government taking steps to be transparent, control corruption? And it's a resounding yes. Like I say, he just sacked senior government officials. So we have
to. Chuck, on that note, remember the last episode we did, anyone can listen to that, with you and Jeff Greco of ISOA and Michael Druckman, the head of country director for IRI, the International Republican Institute in Ukraine, mentioned as well that has changed. There has been significant progress recently. So for those who have worked in Ukraine a while back, that reality is different now.
So, and I'll end my comments here on Ukraine, or talk more if you want me to about it. But this is a generational, conflict issue. Again, is this the start of Cold War 2.0, World War III? But Putin cannot prevail in Ukraine, and I must say that. I mean, I struggle a little bit, because I started my international career, if you will, in Russia during a much different time. This was pre-Putin. And I feel bad for how the Russians are being misled, but again, it's the Ukrainians are fighting for their country, and we have to help. And again, I think that so Ukraine, just the reconstruction of Ukraine, if the war stopped tomorrow, would take years, and so Ukraine is going to be at the top of conversations for years, quite frankly. Over.
How does so internally at USAID, how do priorities and new conflicts get incorporated into the funding stream, into the internal conversations? Does when a conflict arises, when a coup happens, does funding go to whoever has the current contracts, funnel it through those? Is there a set evaluation process internally, or is it a bit more ad hoc? Do the missions take the lead? Could you talk about how that is processed internally at USAID? And also, I guess before we switch off Ukraine, I just want to highlight, Chuck, thank you for noting this isn't just about Ukraine. This is about understanding how that the illegal invasion of Ukraine affects the global economy, development globally, democracy, food security globally, that there's so many other things that really the Ukrainians are fighting to protect us from these other crises. So that's just yet another reason to continue to support them. But when these conflicts do arise, when these coups happen, what happens internally at USAID?
Yeah, unfortunately, at USAID, there's the tyranny of the urgent. But again, like I say, this is a cross-sectoral issue. I want to say that Jim Hope, mission director for Ukraine, made the statement to execute what he's been asked to execute in Ukraine, he would need every contracting officer at the agency. There is a supervisory CO in Ukraine, and they've been sending TDYs. But again, Ukraine is now USAID's largest mission, with a handful at best COs. And so what happens initially, and that's sort of, I guess, the phase that we're in. So whenever something like this happens, AID will issue internal authority to waive competition, which essentially allows the awards to be doubled. I mean, as you can imagine, the USAID doesn't really have the time to, go out and compete everything. But that phase has got to be coming to an end. And I keep hearing, you're going to see USAID opportunities. But there again, USAID has a number of flexible mechanisms, and a good CO and a good operating unit can usually find ways to make legitimately requirements work under these. I mean, I would say that AID has a number of IDIQs that task orders, could be issued against, to help Ukraine. But the fact of the matter is, and I get asked this all the time, as I'm sure you do, Mike, when are there are no Ukraine opportunities. Just, I think I said this when we talked in the spring. There are too many people going to their representatives, senators, and saying, we want to help in Ukraine. So again, here's another set of pressures for AID. They can't continue to not publish opportunities in Ukraine. It can't just go to a handful of existing partners. It can't be done that way moving forward. Now, when does the log jam break? I don't know, because you might remember I mentioned something about a staffing crisis at the agency, but
that came up earlier in passing. Okay, Chuck, I want to make sure we get to a couple more things here. Elections, upcoming budget crisis. We have till September 30th for Congress to keep the government open. Let's talk about the most short term. What's your take on what's going on in Congress? Likelihood of a shutdown, and then if there is a shutdown, what happens? What actually shuts down in terms at USAID?
Yeah. Hopefully we don't have what we had. What was that? Was that was that 2019, where we had that very lengthy shutdown. So it's essentially what happens in a shutdown from an AID perspective is there's a process by which people are determined to be essential personnel. If you're not essential, then you go on furlough. The good news for AID people, and there's not always good news, and I will get to that. The good news for USAID people is you eventually get paid. I was on the last major shutdown. I was on leave, so of course I was declared non-essential and had that multi-week vacation, if you will. And from a implementing partner perspective, so that, you know, the nice thing about USAID awards is, you know, they're multi-year awards. Under a shutdown period, like, you know, you shouldn't be launching a new project. There shouldn't be any like media splashes. So it's just kind of keeping everything going. Unfortunately, and you know, there's a nuance there. If you're a contractor and get furloughed, generally you don't get paid. So that's sort of like that's a really sad part of what happens under a government shutdown at AID. But like I say, most everything sort of continues just by virtue that there are multi-year awards made over.
How does the essential and non-essential determination get made?
Yeah, usually at the mission, it's almost everybody. I mean, because, you know,
everybody is essential or non-essential.
Almost everybody is considered, you know, essential.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, clearly, like the contracting officer, you know, so generally, like I say, if you're on leave, you get furloughed. You know, so I mean, I was never at that level during a furlough where they were, you know, if there were like percentages or whatever. So that like right off the bat, anybody like on leave, home leave, you know, whatever, they're furloughed. You know, and again, and it's just I don't want to like offend somebody and say that I think that they would be considered non-essential and be like, no, I was essential. At a mission, most folks were considered essential, and then, you know, and so it didn't have as big an effect on overseas operations as it did, and even domestically. I would never hear any horror stories. One of the things you have to keep in mind at AID is at most other government entities, hires at the GS5, GS7, the levels that would be considered non-essential, and I hate to say that, AID has institutional support contractors doing that. So most of AID's direct hires are at, I want to say the average direct hire level at AID is like a GS13. You know, like most people who work in the government, you know, a GS13 has, you know, demigod status or something, but AID, that's just kind of because of the whole skewed staffing. So anyways, go ahead.
With the essential staff, do they typically continue to operate as normal, do their trips, do all the programming, or are they supposed to, they're essential, they're still working, but they're supposed to ramp down some activities?
That's a good question. And that would generally, you know, there would be all kinds of, oh, I had this trip planned. So generally trips get canceled unless it's, you know, you got to get so many approvals that you just cancel your trips. Training, again, it's you know, there's this whole guidance that comes down what's considered essential activities, and so, you know, the benchmark is what is the staff necessary to keep things going, and you know, it's everybody's got an opinion on that. My experience overseas, so one of the things that would happen if you were in a multi-CO shop overseas, probably just one of the COs would be considered essential, the supervisory CO. And I can't remember, like, I don't remember us like furloughing a bunch of FSNs or anything like that. Again, it wasn't, you know, and then of course I was domestic and I was like on leave, so I didn't see the effects of like the biggest the latest large shutdown. I think it's a pain in the neck,
Mhm.
but again, AID, especially implementing partners. So never did I have to issue to implementing partners, hey, furlough your staff. I think we would issue guidance, no events, blah, blah, blah. But we never issued anything, hey, furlough, and so that's one of the good things about being an implementing partner and being on multiple awards. It did not seem to have some of the huge effects that a government bureau with 500 GS7s would have, because most of those GS7s would be furloughed.
Well, let's hope they do their job and keep the government open. Looking ahead to the 2024 election, do you want to talk about what you're seeing as the spectrum of possibilities that might be the outcome of those? And then obviously, for our interests, how that would affect USAID, if at all?
Yeah. We're getting ready to become piñatas, during presidential elections. Everybody's like, we need to cut foreign aid, again. So I love what we do, but we're not much of a constituency and we're easy to beat up. So most candidates will campaign against foreign assistance, and they get into office and they realize the strong levers of soft power. So again, there will be nuances to any kind of political administration. I would expect that under a Republican administration, who I think would come back under that administration, they would inject steroids into localization, because that whole group is pretty bullish on localization and led the whole EPPR. I will say that I've had a number of Republican operatives reach out to me asking me questions about NICRA, which makes me think that, and in fact, I've been saying this to people, the coming war at the agency is going to be a war on NICRA. And so,
just to jump in, NICRA is the negotiated indirect cost rate. So that's something the established partners will have for their overhead cost recovery structure with USAID.
And I don't want to mention any names, but there was an article that had some of the highest salaries listed for some of AID's largest partners, and I think somebody was making $1.5 million a year. And I'm sure that person earns every bit of that, but that does not play well with legislators. So I just by virtue of people reaching out to me, and I know, again, it's an imperfect understanding of what's going on with NICRA. And oh, by the way, to the best of my knowledge, the U.S. government, the agency, created NICRA. So but I keep hearing this. These NICRAs are so high. Why are they so high? So just belt yourself in. The next war at AID is going to be a war on NICRA. You can write that down as a prediction.
And do you anticipate that as well if Biden's reelected, or if a different Democratic administration comes in, or is that a bit more if a Republican administration comes in 2024?
I think there are a lot. I think there are a number of. I think it's a bipartisan issue, and even I've gotten wind from current USAID staff members, taking a hard look at NICRA, just because of all the publicity, and and again, that's NICRA is neither a good thing or an evil thing. It was a tool set up, and it had its reasons. But again, I had somebody reach out to me wanting me to help them increase their NICRA, and I was like, I don't think you want to do that. I don't think that would be a good idea under the bipartisan comments about NICRA.
Chuck, we're getting to the end here. Always feels like there's more I want to ask you. It's always so great talking with you and having you on here. I think as we wrap up, what are some things you're looking at in the future? What are some, to see which way the USAID market is going, to see, we're talking about localization, about the cost structure, NICRA, and some of these other topics. What are some like trends or indicators you're going to be watching over the coming months and really next, year plus going into the 2024 election to see where this market is going?
know we're almost out of time. So again, I want to thank everybody for the great work that you all do, and so happy to continue to maintain the partners. I think the main thing is we know that there is going to be a new director of the Office of Acquisition and Assistance. And I think that this person is good news, even though I would have preferred it to have been a senior foreign service officer. But I think that's the main thing that I'm watching. I expect this person, I expect this person to have an ambitious agenda. I expect this person to be innovative. And the advice that I could give this person is staffing. You won't be able to do anything until the staffing is solved. It's just reached a critical mass. And so I think this person is up for the job, and stand ready to help this person as y'all do and the rest of us do. That's the main trend that I'm watching right now.
Well, thank you so much, Chuck. Again, follow Chuck Pope on LinkedIn. Check out Pope International's website. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And be sure to follow the Aid Market podcast for future shows, and check out the last show we had with Chuck on Ukraine a couple months back. Hope to have you on again soon, Chuck. Again, thank you so much for the time and just being so helpful and sharing what's going on in this very important market. And thank you to everyone who's listening for the important work you and your organizations do. And look forward to continuing the conversation on the next show.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Mike.
All right.
We'll see you.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you for tuning in to the Aid Market Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and connect with Mike Shanley on LinkedIn to stay updated on the latest USAID funding trends.